The day begins with the familiar sound of clanging lockers and bustling conversations filling the hallways of Lincoln High School, an old institution with a prestigious reputation in the community. The morning sun filters through the tall windows, casting warm rays across the students who are making their way to their first classes, still shaking off the haze of sleep. Among the crowd, moving with quiet confidence and purpose, is Amara Thompson, a black teenage girl with a determined gaze and a calm, poised demeanor. She walks down the hallway with her backpack securely slung over her shoulder, blending in yet somehow standing apart with her unassuming grace. For most, she's just another student, but Amara carries a unique burden and responsibility that few are aware of. Amara's father, Chief Marcus Thompson, is the well-respected chief of police for the city. Known for his integrity and dedication, Marcus has a reputation for being a strict but fair leader, someone who values justice over convenience and never hesitates to make tough calls. His position is no secret to Amara, of course, and she's grown up under his watchful eye, instilled with his sense of duty, discipline, and resilience. However, Amara keeps her father's status quiet, preferring to be known simply as herself rather than the chief's daughter. To her, independence and the ability to stand on her own are just as important as the values her father has taught her. Marcus understands this about his daughter and admires her quiet strength, often leaving her small, handwritten notes of encouragement on tough days, a private ritual that they share, bonding them in ways words seldom can. As she navigates her way through the busy hallways, Amara heads towards her locker to pick up her books for the first class. She pauses momentarily, glancing around the crowded corridor, taking in the familiar faces of her classmates, who seem oblivious to the unseen tensions around them. She notices some teachers chatting by the entrance, sharing early morning coffee and laughs, while others prepare their classrooms. The school seems just as it always does, a bubble of routine and adolescent energy. But today there's a different figure present, standing at the edge of the hallway near the front entrance. Officer David Rollins, a tall, imposing white police officer in his late 30s, is stationed there, observing the students with an unblinking, almost clinical gaze. Rollins has been assigned to patrol the school district under the guise of a routine security measure, though he privately resents the assignment. A former military man, he joined the police force with ambitions of cleaning up the city. But over time, his frustration and dissatisfaction have grown. He views himself as a hardliner, someone who knows how to spot trouble before it starts, and this attitude has hardened into a sense of superiority over the years. This morning, however, he feels particularly irritated, as if the mundane task of standing around a high school is somehow beneath him. As Amara walks by, Rollins notices her out of the corner of his eye. He watches her with narrowed eyes, picking up on her calm, confident stride, which to him seems almost too confident. In his mind, her poise reads as defiance, a subtle challenge to authority. He knows nothing about her, but his instincts, clouded by biases he refuses to acknowledge, tell him she's up to something. His mind races with assumptions, each more unjustified than the last, but to Rollins, they seem like facts. He tells himself he's simply observing her, that he's just doing his job by watching over the students, but something about Amara unsettles him. The officer shifts his position, angling himself to intercept her as she moves toward her locker. Amara notices him as he steps in her path, her posture straightening instinctively. Despite feeling a slight unease, she doesn't waver. She's had similar experiences before, unwelcome scrutiny in places she has every right to be. Her father's lessons about how to handle these situations echo in her mind, urging her to stay calm and composed. Without breaking eye contact, she stops and gives him a polite, neutral look. "Excuse me, young lady," Rollins says, his voice a shade too loud, attracting the attention of a few students nearby. He crosses his arms, leaning slightly forward, a posture meant to impose his authority. What's in the backpack? Caught off guard by the abruptness of the question, Amara hesitates for a brief second before responding. My books and personal items, she answers simply, keeping her voice level and respectful. Rollins isn't satisfied. To him, her calm response seems calculated, like she's hiding something. I'm going to need to take a look at that, he insists, reaching a hand out towards her backpack without waiting for permission. Amara steps back instinctively, her grip tightening on the strap of her bag. Officer, may I ask why you need to check my bag, she asks, her tone polite but firm. Rollins narrows his eyes, seeing her request for an explanation as insubordination. Just a routine check, he says brusquely. I'm making sure everyone here is safe and that no one's bringing in anything they shouldn't. Amara takes a deep breath, assessing the situation. She considers mentioning her father, but something stops her. She doesn't want to use his name as a shield. Instead, she remembers the legal rights her father taught her and stands her ground, though not in a way that could be seen as disrespectful. With all due respect, officer, she replies carefully, I haven't done anything wrong, and I'm not aware of any reason to have my bag searched. Rollins scoffs, his irritation mounting. You're giving me lip, he mutters, though loud enough for the few students nearby to hear. You don't look like you belong here anyway. The words hang in the air, unmistakable in their implication, and Amara's face tightens in response. She knows better than to react emotionally, but inside, she feels the sting of his accusation. Before she can respond, Rollins reaches out and yanks her bag from her shoulder, tearing it open with a rough tug. He rummages through it, tossing her notebooks and personal belongings onto the floor with careless disdain. Her hands clench at her sides, but she forces herself to remain composed, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. As he rifles through her things, a small envelope slips out, a note from her father, tucked into one of her textbooks as a token of support. It's a simple message, one that reads, "Stay strong, Amara. I'm proud of you." Rollins doesn't notice it. He's too focused on his baseless search for something incriminating. A crowd begins to gather, students watching with a mixture of confusion and unease. Some glance at each other, exchanging silent looks that convey a shared understanding of the scene's unfairness, but no one dares to speak up. The teachers nearby, taken aback by the confrontation, hesitate, unsure whether or not they should intervene. It's as if the entire hallway is holding its breath, waiting to see how this will unfold. Amara finally breaks the silence. "Officer Rollins, please." "There's nothing in there, except my school supplies." Her voice remains steady, though there's a subtle hint of frustration beneath it. Rollins, feeling the weight of the watching eyes and sensing his authority slipping, straightens up, clutching the empty bag with a scowl. "I don't appreciate your attitude, young lady," he says, attempting to reclaim his dominance. "I'm just doing my job. And you'd be wise to remember who you're dealing with." Amara's gaze hardens slightly. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," she replies, her words laced with a quiet strength. But she says no more, her restraint a silent challenge that speaks louder than any accusation could. Rollins takes a step back, feeling strangely unsettled by her calm defiance. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crosses his mind, but he quickly brushes it aside, unwilling to entertain the possibility that he may have acted out of line. The silence grows heavier as the tension thickens, setting the stage for a confrontation that none of them will soon forget. The crowded school hallway falls into a tense silence as Officer Rollins continues to inspect Amara's belongings, scattering her books and notebooks on the cold tile floor without a hint of concern for the mess he's creating. Each item he tosses aside is met with a curious, scrutinizing gaze, as if he's sure he'll eventually find something incriminating. Amara stands a few feet away, her expression calm but her mind racing. She knows she's done nothing wrong, but the humiliation of being treated this way, publicly and without cause, strikes her deeply. Her classmates watch, some whispering among themselves, but none step forward to interfere. Officer Rollins, ignoring the crowd that's slowly gathering around them, seems to be fueled by his own assumptions. He mutters to himself as he digs through her things, his irritation growing. The longer he searches, the more his frustration mounts, and in his mind, her calm demeanor only confirms his suspicion that she's hiding something. How else could she stand there, unruffled, unless she was guilty of something? Finally, he finds a small, empty pencil case. Rollins holds it up with a smug smile, waving it in her direction, as if he's just uncovered a vital clue. "What's this?" he sneers, shaking the pencil case at her. "Pretty empty for a schoolgirl, don't you think?" Amara looks at him, unblinking. "It's just a pencil case, officer. I took the pens out because they leaked," she replies, her voice steady, giving nothing away. Rollins raises an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by her answer. "And I suppose you expect me to just believe that?" he scoffs. "Do you know how many kids try to sneak things into school in harmless containers like this?" Amara feels a flicker of anger but bites it back, remembering her father's advice, never let anyone see they've rattled you. Instead, she meets Rollins's gaze with unflinching calm. "It's the truth. I haven't done anything wrong." Her response seems to anger him further. Rollins's voice rises, catching the attention of even more students and a few teachers who are now openly watching the scene. "I don't appreciate your tone, young lady," he says harshly. "When an officer is questioning you, you answer with respect." A faint sigh escapes Amara's lips, though she keeps her expression neutral. "I'm being respectful, officer. I'm just explaining that there's nothing in my bag that should concern you." Her words, though simple and respectful, cut deeper than Rollins would like to admit. He feels his authority being questioned, challenged by a teenager no less. Something in her demeanor, her calmness, her quiet confidence unsettles him. To him, it feels like defiance. He clenches his jaw, his fingers tightening around the empty pencil case, as if by sheer force he can turn it into evidence of her guilt. In a final attempt to assert control, Rollins steps closer to Amara, invading her personal space. His tone drops to a menacing whisper, one meant only for her ears but audible enough to the nearest bystanders. "I know your type," he says, his eyes narrowing. "Thinking you're too smart to get caught. Thinking you can talk your way out of anything. But I'm not buying it." Amara feels her heart pounding, though she forces herself to stay calm. She knows he's trying to intimidate her, to push her into showing fear or anger. But she's not going to give him that satisfaction. Instead, she lifts her chin slightly and looks him straight in the eyes. "With all due respect, officer," she says, her voice steady, "I don't know what you think I've done, but I'm just here to go to class. I have nothing to hide." Rollins's face twists in a frown, his frustration becoming evident. He's not used to people, especially young people, standing up to him, especially in such a calm, controlled manner. It grates on him, challenging his sense of authority in front of an audience. His grip tightens around her bag, and with a sudden motion, he throws it on the ground beside her belongings. "Fine," he snaps. "Maybe you don't have anything in your bag this time, but don't think for a second I'll let you get away with this attitude. This is my territory, and I decide what happens here." As he speaks, one of the teachers steps forward, finally deciding to intervene. Mr. Kinsley, an older teacher who's seen his share of conflicts, clears his throat. "Officer Rollins," he says carefully, his voice measured but respectful, "perhaps this has gone far enough. Miss Thompson is one of our top students. And if she says she hasn't done anything wrong, I believe her. Rollins turns sharply to face Mr. Kinsley, his eyes narrowing in a way that suggests he doesn't appreciate the interruption. With all due respect, sir, I don't need a schoolteacher telling me how to do my job, he snaps, his tone edged with irritation. I'm here to make sure this place is safe, and I'll do whatever it takes to make sure of that. Mr. Kinsley raises his hands in a gesture of peace, trying to de-escalate the situation. Of course, officer, I just wanted to offer a little perspective. Miss Thompson is a model student, and I've never known her to cause any trouble. Amara watches the exchange in silence, a mixture of gratitude and discomfort flooding her. She appreciates Mr. Kinsley's attempt to stand up for her, but she also doesn't want him dragged into this. She knows this confrontation isn't just about her. Officer Rollins seems determined to find something, anything, to justify his behavior. As Rollins turns back to Amara, he notices the crowd of students has grown, their faces filled with a mix of curiosity, confusion, and even a hint of defiance. They can sense the unfairness of the situation, even if they don't understand all the details. This only fuels Rollins's irritation, and he feels the need to reassert his authority, to remind them all who's in charge. I'll be watching you, he says, his voice a harsh whisper meant solely for Amara. You may think you're clever, but you can't hide from me. Sooner or later, people like you always slip up. The weight of his words lingers in the air, heavy with implication. Amara feels her stomach twist with a mixture of frustration and anger, but she knows better than to show it. Instead, she simply nods, giving him a polite, measured response that offers neither submission nor defiance. Understood, officer. Rollins stands there for a moment longer, as if he's searching for something else to say, something to regain control over the situation. But with the crowd growing and Mr. Kinsley standing nearby, he realizes he's out of options. With one last glare at Amara, he steps back, muttering to himself as he turns and walks away. Amara slowly bends down to gather her belongings, her movements steady and deliberate, refusing to show any sign of defeat. She notices her classmates watching her, some of them nodding slightly, a silent gesture of support. She feels a surge of relief but also an undercurrent of anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. Mr. Kinsley kneels down to help her pick up her things, offering her a gentle smile. You handled that well, Amara, he says quietly. Most people would have lost their cool. Thank you, Mr. Kinsley, she replies, her voice softer now, showing a hint of the tension she's been holding back. I just didn't expect that. He nods knowingly, his gaze softening. Sometimes people like him think they can intimidate others into silence. But you did the right thing. Your calmness spoke louder than anything else. As she stands, holding her bag close, Amara glances in the direction Rollins went, a determination settling over her. She knows this won't be the last time she encounters someone like him. But today she's proven something to herself, that she has the strength to stand her ground, even in the face of unfounded scrutiny. Mr. Kinsley pats her shoulder gently. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to come to me. All right. Amara smiles, grateful for his kindness. Thank you, Mr. Kinsley. I appreciate it. The bell rings, signaling the start of classes, and the students begin to disperse, the crowd thinning. But as Amara heads to her classroom, her mind remains on Rollins's words, the venom in his tone, and the sense of injustice that still clings to her. She knows she'll have to face people like him again, and she resolves to be ready, to never let fear or anger shake her resolve. Unbeknownst to her, however, Officer Rollins isn't quite finished. As he walks away, he mutters to himself, his thoughts already forming plans to keep an eye on her to him. This isn't over, it's just the beginning of his silent vendetta against a girl who dared to challenge his authority. And for Amara, this is the first catalyst in a series of events that will test her resilience, her courage, and the strength of the values her father instilled in her. The morning had taken a harsh turn for Amara, but she managed to compose herself, walking into her first class with her head held high. Despite the unsettling encounter with Officer Rollins, she tries to shift her focus to her studies, determined not to let the incident consume her day. Her classmates occasionally glance her way, some with admiration for her composure, others with lingering curiosity, but Amara avoids their eyes, preferring not to discuss what happened. Yet inside she can still feel the lingering sting of Officer Rollins's condescending words, the way he seemed to strip her of her dignity with nothing more than a glance. But the incident is far from over. As Amara settles into her seat, flipping through her textbook in an effort to distract herself, she doesn't realize that Officer Rollins is still lingering nearby, standing outside the classroom door with an air of impatience. He's pacing, his jaw clenched, mind replaying the encounter in the hallway. In his mind, Amara's behavior was nothing short of insolent. Her calmness, her refusal to show fear or deference, eats away at him. He's convinced that she's hiding something, that there's more to this troublesome girl than meets the eye. The idea that she might get away with challenging him fills him with a sense of vindictive resolve. He waits, biding his time, until he hears the bell ring, signaling the end of the first period. As students begin to file out of the classroom, Amara among them, he positions himself in the middle of the hallway, arms crossed and his face a hardened mask of authority. She spots him instantly, and her stomach drops, though she keeps her expression neutral. Amara had hoped their interaction was over, but it seems that Rollins has other plans. As she approaches, he steps directly into her path, blocking her way once again. This time he doesn't bother with the pretense of politeness. His voice is a low, barely controlled growl. "Miss Thompson," he says, enunciating each word with a sharp edge. "I need to speak with you." Now, Amara hesitates, glancing around and noticing how other students slow their steps, watching the confrontation with growing interest. She takes a steadying breath and meets his gaze, keeping her tone as respectful as she can manage. "Is there something wrong, officer?" Rollins's eyes flash with irritation. "I don't like your attitude," he says bluntly. "You think you're clever, don't you? Talking back, acting like you're untouchable." Amara stiffens. The accusation is so unfounded, so blatantly hostile, that she almost feels the urge to laugh, though she knows that would only make things worse. Instead, she replies, "I'm just trying to get to my next class, sir." "Oh, I'm sure you are," he sneers. "But let's get one thing straight. You don't make the rules here." "I do." His voice carries a heavy weight, enough to make even the nearby students take a step back, sensing the tension radiating off him. Amara feels her patience wearing thin. She's been nothing but respectful, and yet he continues to treat her like a criminal. She wants to walk away, to end this humiliating display, but Rollins's posture, the glint in his eyes, tells her he's not going to let that happen. Not yet. "Kerry." Before she can respond, he takes another step forward, forcing her to either step back or hold her ground. She chooses the latter, meeting his stare with quiet defiance. "Do you have a reason for stopping me again, officer?" she asks, her voice steady despite the nerves simmering beneath. Rollins's face darkens, as if her calmness is a personal affront. "I don't need a reason to make sure this school is safe," he snaps. "And right now you're giving me plenty of reasons to keep an eye on you." A murmur ripples through the students watching, a mix of unease and disbelief. Some of them start taking out their phones, but Rollins is too absorbed in his anger to notice. Amara, however, catches a glimpse of the raised phones and shakes her head subtly, not wanting the situation to escalate further. She understands that things could get out of control quickly, And the last thing she wants is to cause more chaos. I don't understand, Officer Rollins, she says, still keeping her tone respectful. I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just trying to attend my classes, like every other student here. Every other student here doesn't look at me the way you do, Rollins retorts, his voice tinged with bitterness. You think you're better than me? Smarter? Because that's exactly how you're acting. Amara feels a pang of frustration. How can he twist her words and actions so completely? She takes a deep breath, reminding herself of her father's advice: stay calm, stay respectful, don't let anyone drag you down to their level. But even with those words in mind, her patience is wearing thin. She knows she hasn't done anything wrong, and yet this man continues to hound her, treating her with unwarranted suspicion. Officer, with all due respect, I don't think I'm better than anyone, she says, her voice barely above a whisper, though there's a steely edge to it. I just want to get to my next class. Rollins narrows his eyes, studying her. For a brief moment he seems almost thrown by her response, as if he expected her to lash out, to give him a reason to escalate further. But Amara's composure only deepens his frustration. He can feel the control slipping away, and the eyes of the students around him only add to his sense of humiliation. You think you're clever, don't you? He mutters, his voice dropping low. I see right through you. Just remember, I'll be watching. His words are laced with menace, a thinly veiled threat that chills Amara to the core. She meets his gaze, her eyes unwavering, refusing to show the fear she feels creeping up her spine. As the tension mounts, a voice suddenly cuts through the crowd, clear and authoritative. Officer Rollins, may I have a word? Both Amara and Rollins turn to see Principal Harrison approaching, his face a mask of calm but stern authority. Harrison is a tall, distinguished man in his 50s, known for his fairness and level-headedness. He has a reputation for maintaining order without resorting to intimidation, and his presence seems to deflate the tension in the hallway almost immediately. Rollins straightens up, his face flushing slightly as he realizes he's being observed by his superior. Principal Harrison he greets, forcing a polite smile. I was just ensuring the safety of the students. Principal Harrison's gaze shifts to Amara, who nods at him in silent acknowledgement, before returning to Rollins with a pointed look. I understand, officer, but I believe Miss Thompson is simply trying to attend her classes. Perhaps we can address any concerns you have in a more private setting. Rollins opens his mouth as if to argue, but something in Principal Harrison's steady gaze stops him. Reluctantly, he nods, though his jaw remains tight with barely concealed anger. Of course, Principal Harrison, he says, his tone stiff. Principal Harrison nods, satisfied, and turns to Amara. Miss Thompson, you're free to go to your next class. I apologize for the disruption. Amara offers a polite nod in return, grateful for his intervention. Thank you, Principal Harrison, she says softly, gathering her things and stepping away from Rollins. As she walks down the hallway, she can feel the eyes of her classmates following her, but she keeps her head held high, determined not to show any weakness. Principal Harrison watches her go before turning back to Rollins, his expression hardening. A word in my office, Officer Rollins, he says, his tone leaving no room for argument. Rollins's face pales slightly, but he nods, following Harrison down the hallway and into the administration wing. The students watch them go, murmuring amongst themselves, some of them clearly relieved that the confrontation has come to an end, others still buzzing with curiosity and unease. In the privacy of his office, Principal Harrison closes the door and turns to face Rollins. I don't know what's going on between you and Miss Thompson, he begins, his tone measured but firm, but I won't tolerate any form of intimidation or harassment towards my students. Rollins stiffens, crossing his arms defensively. I was just doing my job, sir. That girl has an attitude problem. She thinks she's above the rules. Harrison's eyebrows lift slightly, a hint of disbelief in his expression. Is that so? Because from where I stood, it looked like she was simply trying to get to class. Rollins's face reddens, his frustration bubbling over. With all due respect, Principal Harrison, you weren't there for the whole interaction. She was being disrespectful, challenging my authority. I can't just let that slide. Principal Harrison's gaze hardens. And I expect you to carry out your duties with professionalism and respect, Officer Rollins. This is a school, not a place for power struggles. He leans forward, his eyes narrowing. I know Miss Thompson. She's one of our best students. She's respectful, diligent, and has never caused any trouble. So I suggest you reassess your approach. Rollins clenches his jaw, struggling to maintain his composure. He can feel the admonishment cutting into his pride, and it only deepens his resentment toward Amara. The idea that she might be a model student doesn't align with the narrative he's constructed in his mind, and he finds himself bristling at the thought of letting this go. Understood, sir, he replies through gritted teeth, though there's no sincerity in his tone. Principal Harrison doesn't miss the tension in his voice. He regards Rollins with a thoughtful frown before speaking again, softer this time. Look, officer, I understand that your job can be challenging. You're tasked with keeping the school safe. And I respect that. But targeting students without cause, especially those who have shown nothing but respect, is not the way to earn anyone's trust. I need you to keep that in mind going forward. Rollins nods, but the words barely penetrate the simmering anger inside him. He feels humiliated, his authority undermined, all because of a teenage girl who, in his eyes, still hasn't shown him the proper deference. As he leaves the principal's office, he vows silently that this isn't over. Back in the hallway, Amara makes her way to her next class, though the confrontation with Rollins continues to weigh on her mind. She's grateful to Principal Harrison for stepping in, but a part of her can't shake the feeling that Rollins isn't done with her. There was a look in his eyes, a dark, simmering resentment that made her skin crawl. She resolves to keep her distance from him as much as possible, but a lingering worry remains, a small voice in the back of her mind warning her that this is only the beginning. As the day progresses, Amara finds it difficult to concentrate in her classes, her thoughts continually drifting back to Rollins. She can feel the weight of his words pressing down on her, the implied threat hanging over her like a storm cloud. Her father's lessons on handling authority echo in her mind, reminding her to stay calm, to stand her ground, but the reality of facing such unprovoked hostility leaves a bitter taste in her mouth. By the time the final bell rings, signaling the end of the school day, Amara is exhausted, both physically and emotionally. She gathers her things, intending to head straight home and leave the day's events behind her. But as she steps outside, she spots Rollins lingering near the entrance, his gaze fixed on her with a look that sends a chill down her spine. He approaches her, his footsteps slow and deliberate, his face a mask of cold determination. Leaving so soon, he asks, his voice smooth but laced with malice. Don't think for a second that I've forgotten our little interaction. Amara swallows, her hand instinctively tightening around the strap of her backpack. I don't understand why you're doing this, officer. I haven't done anything to deserve this treatment. Rollins's smile is thin, almost predatory. You're right, you haven't done anything yet. But I'll be here, watching, waiting, because people like you always slip up sooner or later. Amara feels a surge of anger, but she bites her tongue, knowing that any response she gives will only fuel his resolve. Instead, she meets his gaze one last time, her expression resolute. Without another word, she turns and walks away, leaving Rollins standing there, his eyes following her retreating figure with a look of twisted satisfaction. As she walks home, Amara can feel the weight of his gaze lingering, a constant reminder that this isn't over. She knows she'll have to be on guard, that this is only the beginning of a much larger conflict. But deep down, she also knows that she won't back down. No matter what Officer Rollins throws her way, she'll stand her ground, just like her father taught her. And somewhere, somehow, she feels a quiet strength settle within her, a reminder that she's not alone in this fight. The days that follow the initial confrontation with Officer Rollins are tense for Amara. Although she tries to focus on her schoolwork and her life outside of school, she can't escape the looming shadow of Rollins's presence. She often catches glimpses of him in the hallways, his eyes tracking her every move with a look that is both unsettling and infuriating. His presence hangs over her like a dark cloud, and every time she thinks she's escaped it, he's there, a constant reminder that he's watching, waiting for any excuse to pounce. Amara's friends notice her unease, but she brushes off their concerns, unwilling to drag them into her problems. She knows that Rollins would only use it against her if he saw her speaking to others about him. Her father taught her that sometimes the best way to handle intimidation is with silence and resilience. But even her father's advice feels inadequate at times. It's one thing to hear it, but it's entirely another to live it, day in and day out. One afternoon, about a week after the incident in the hallway, Amara is in the school library, sitting alone at a table near the back. The library is quiet, with only a few students scattered among the tables and bookshelves. She finds solace in the stillness, using the silence to center herself, trying to shake off the perpetual anxiety that Rollins has stirred within her. She's buried in her textbook, scribbling notes, when she hears the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. Her heart skips a beat as she looks up to see Officer Rollins standing at the edge of the table, his arms crossed, a smug look on his face. He says nothing, merely watching her with a gaze that makes her feel as though she's under a microscope. Amara swallows hard, her throat dry, but she refuses to let him see her discomfort. "Can I help you, Officer Rollins?" she asks, keeping her voice steady. Rollins smirks, pulling out the chair across from her and sitting down, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp, like a predator sizing up his prey. "Just checking in," he replies, his tone dripping with mock sincerity. "I like to keep an eye on students who think they're above the rules." Amara's grip tightens on her pen, but she forces herself to remain calm. "I haven't broken any rules," she says quietly, though her tone holds a firm edge. Rollins leans forward, his expression hardening. "Maybe not yet. But I know your type. You think you're clever, that you can walk around with an air of superiority just because you're special." He emphasizes the last word with a sneer, his eyes narrowing as he watches her reaction. Amara bristles at the implication but doesn't rise to the bait. "I'm just here to study, officer," she says, gesturing to her open textbook. "If you don't mind, I'd like to get back to it." Rollins's smile widens, and there's something almost sinister in his expression. "Oh, I don't mind. But you should know, Miss Thompson, that I'm very thorough when it comes to enforcing the rules. One small slip-up, one tiny misstep, and I'll be there, ready to deal with it. Don't think for a second that your father's position gives you immunity here." The mention of her father sends a jolt of anger through her. She knows he's trying to provoke her, to get her to react in a way that would justify further harassment. But she steels herself, refusing to give him what he wants. She closes her textbook with deliberate calm and meets his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "With all due respect, officer," she says slowly, "my father taught me to follow the rules and respect authority. So if you're looking for trouble, I'm afraid you won't find it here." For a brief moment she sees something flicker in Rollins's eyes, a flash of surprise, perhaps even doubt, but it quickly vanishes, replaced by a look of contempt. "We'll see about that," he mutters, rising from the chair and straightening his uniform. "Just remember I'm watching." With that, he turns on his heel and leaves, his footsteps echoing through the quiet library. Amara watches him go, her hands clenched in fists beneath the table, her knuckles white with suppressed frustration. She's exhausted from constantly having to defend herself, to walk on eggshells, all because of one man's twisted sense of authority. But she knows she can't give up, she won't let him break her. Later that evening, Amara returns home, her mind still racing with the events of the day. Her father, Chief Marcus Thompson, is waiting for her in the kitchen, a concerned look on his face as she drops her bag on the counter and sighs heavily. He's noticed the subtle changes in her behavior, the tension in her shoulders, the exhaustion in her eyes, and he suspects that something more than just schoolwork is weighing on her. "Amara," he begins gently, "is everything okay at school?" She hesitates, debating whether or not to tell him the truth. She knows that her father would take action if he knew about Officer Rollins, but part of her doesn't want to rely on him to fix this problem. She wants to handle it herself, to prove that she can stand her ground. But the weariness in her father's eyes, the concern etched into his face, makes her pause. Taking a deep breath, she nods slowly. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Marcus nods, leaning against the counter, his gaze attentive. "Of course, you can ask me anything." Amara bites her lip, choosing her words carefully. "How do you deal with people who think they have power over you? People who try to use their authority to intimidate you?" He raises an eyebrow, a hint of understanding flickering in his eyes. "That sounds awfully specific. Is there someone at school who's giving you trouble?" She hesitates again, but eventually nods. "There's this officer. He's been assigned to the school, and he's been watching me, questioning me, like he's trying to catch me doing something wrong. I don't know why he's targeting me, but it feels personal." Marcus's jaw tightens slightly, and a flicker of anger crosses his face, though he quickly schools his expression into one of calm. "What's his name?" "Officer Rollins," she replies, a note of frustration creeping into her voice. "He's always watching me, always waiting for me to mess up. It's like he's looking for a reason to make my life difficult." Marcus nods, his expression thoughtful. "Amara, people like Rollins, they're drawn to power. They think their authority gives them the right to control others, to bend them to their will. But that kind of power is hollow. Real strength comes from within, from knowing who you are and refusing to let others define you." Amara listens, her father's words resonating deeply within her. She's seen him handle difficult situations with grace and calmness, never allowing others to shake his resolve. It's a lesson she's learned from him, but hearing it now in the context of her own struggles brings new meaning to it. "What should I do?" she asks quietly, her eyes meeting his. Marcus places a comforting hand on her shoulder, his gaze steady. "Stand your ground, Amara. Don't let him intimidate you. Show him that you're stronger than his words, stronger than his need to control you. And if it ever goes too far, if he crosses a line, then you come to me, and we'll handle it together." Amara feels a weight lift from her shoulders, a sense of calm settling over her. Her father's support gives her the strength she needs to face Rollins, to confront the fear and frustration that's been building inside her. She nods, a determined glint in her eyes. "Thank you, Dad," she says softly, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I won't let him win." The next day, Amara returns to school with renewed confidence. She walks the halls with her head held high, her shoulders back, exuding an air of quiet strength that surprises even her. She's prepared for whatever Rollins throws at her, ready to face his scrutiny without fear. And sure enough, As she heads to her locker between classes, she spots him standing at the end of the hallway, watching her with that same piercing gaze. Their eyes meet, and for a moment, neither of them moves. Rollins's face is unreadable, his expression a mask of restrained hostility, but Amara sees the faintest flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. It's as if he's realized that his intimidation tactics are no longer working, that she's no longer afraid. Amara refuses to break eye contact, standing her ground. She knows that this silent standoff is a test, a battle of wills, and she's determined to emerge victorious. She won't let him define her, won't let his gaze make her feel small or insignificant. After what feels like an eternity, Rollins finally looks away, a scowl darkening his face. He turns and walks in the opposite direction, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. Amara watches him go, a sense of triumph swelling within her. She's won this round, and she knows that as long as she holds on to her strength, she can withstand whatever he throws at her next. But even as she feels victorious, a part of her knows that this isn't the end. Rollins isn't the type to back down easily. He's like a storm, unpredictable and relentless, and she knows that he'll come at her again, perhaps in a different way, perhaps with even more intensity. But now, armed with her father's wisdom and her own resilience, she feels ready. And so, as she walks to her next class, Amara holds her head high, her heart steady. She's no longer just a student facing harassment from a police officer. She's a young woman finding her voice, discovering her strength, and standing her ground in the face of unjust authority. Several days pass, and although Officer Rollins seems to have retreated somewhat, Amara knows better than to let her guard down. There's a tension in the air, a silent threat that hangs over her every step in the hallways. She can feel it like a dark shadow, a presence lurking just out of sight. She knows Rollins is biding his time, waiting for the right moment to strike again, and this realization has her on edge, even as she maintains her outward composure. True to her father's advice, Amara stands her ground each day, refusing to let Rollins's intimidation tactics get to her. But it's exhausting. Every morning she steels herself for whatever he might throw her way, her shoulders squared, her jaw set with quiet determination. Her friends and teachers notice the change in her, the subtle tension in her movements, the way her eyes seem to search the room before she relaxes. And while some offer supportive smiles or concerned looks, no one truly understands the weight of what she's facing. Then, one afternoon, Rollins finds the opportunity he's been waiting for. It's near the end of the school day, and Amara is in the gymnasium, finishing up her last PE class. The students are engaged in a casual game of basketball, their laughter and cheers echoing off the walls, the sound filling the spacious room with a sense of freedom and youthful energy. For a brief moment, Amara lets herself relax, caught up in the game, her mind free from the constant worry that has plagued her for days. She feels the thrill of competition, the satisfaction of scoring a point, and for the first time in what feels like ages, she's just another high school student enjoying a normal day. But as she turns to retrieve the ball from the far side of the gym, she catches sight of a figure standing in the doorway. Her heart skips a beat, the familiar tension flooding back as she recognizes Officer Rollins, his gaze fixed intently on her. He's watching her with that same calculating look, a predator sizing up his prey. She quickly averts her gaze, hoping he'll leave, but she can feel his eyes on her, cold and unwavering. Moments later, the PE teacher, Coach Darnell, blows the whistle, signaling the end of class. The students begin to disperse, heading towards the locker rooms, chattering and laughing as they gather their things. Amara lingers for a moment, dreading the thought of crossing paths with Rollins again, but she steels herself and makes her way towards the exit, keeping her head high even as her heart pounds in her chest. As she steps out into the hallway, she realizes with a sinking feeling that Rollins is waiting for her. He stands by the lockers, his arms crossed, his expression a mask of smug satisfaction. It's clear from the look on his face that he has something planned, and the realization sends a chill down her spine. She takes a steadying breath, reminding herself of her father's words, and walks towards him, refusing to let him see her fear. "Miss Thompson," he greets her, his voice laced with false politeness. "I'd like a word with you." Amara stops a few feet away, keeping her expression neutral. "Yes, officer." Rollins lets the silence stretch, his gaze raking over her, searching for any sign of weakness. "I've been hearing some concerning things about you," he says finally, his tone deliberately slow, as if savoring each word. "It seems you've been quite the troublemaker lately." Amara's eyes narrow slightly, though she keeps her voice steady. "I don't know what you're talking about. I've been following the rules, just like everyone else." He chuckles, a low, humorless sound that echoes through the empty hallway. "Is that so? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been doing quite the opposite. Disrespecting authority, creating disturbances. That doesn't sound like following the rules to me." Amara's jaw tightens, anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. She knows he's twisting the truth, trying to paint her as a problem student to justify his harassment. But she won't give him the satisfaction of seeing her react. "Officer, I've done nothing wrong," she says, her voice cool and measured. "If you have an actual reason for stopping me, I'd like to hear it." Rollins's eyes narrow, his smug smile fading slightly. He's clearly not used to being challenged like this, and the realization seems to irritate him. He steps closer, his posture looming, attempting to intimidate her. "You know, you may think you're clever, hiding behind that calm little act of yours, but I see right through it. You're just like the rest of them, thinking you're untouchable, thinking you're smarter than everyone else." The venom in his words takes her aback, but she holds her ground, refusing to back down. "With all due respect, officer, I don't appreciate being spoken to like this. I'm just trying to go to my next class." "Oh, I'm sure you are," he sneers, crossing his arms. "But I'll be keeping a very close eye on you, Miss Thompson. One wrong move, one tiny slip-up, and you'll be out of here before you know it." Amara doesn't respond, knowing that anything she says will only fuel his anger. Instead, she simply nods, turning to walk away, her heart pounding. But as she moves past him, he reaches out, grabbing her arm with enough force to make her wince. "You're not going anywhere just yet," he mutters, his grip tight. "I want to make sure you understand exactly what's at stake here." She pulls her arm free, her voice steady but laced with warning. "Don't touch me, Officer Rollins." Her words hang in the air, and for a moment, the two of them stand in tense silence, locked in a battle of wills. Rollins's face flushes with anger, his hand twitching as if he's barely restraining himself from reaching out again. But he knows that he's gone as far as he can, and with a final glare, he steps back, allowing her to pass. Amara walks away, her heart racing, her mind swirling with a mixture of anger and fear. She knows that this encounter is just the beginning of Rollins's vendetta, that he'll continue to find ways to make her life difficult. But she refuses to let him win. She's stronger than that, stronger than his intimidation, his hatred, his need to control. The days that follow are filled with a tense silence, a waiting game between them. Rollins continues to watch her from the shadows, his gaze sharp and unrelenting, but Amara holds her head high, refusing to give him the reaction he wants. She channels her frustration into her studies, into her friendships, using every ounce of her strength to stay focused, to remain resilient. One afternoon, however, things take a turn for the worse. Amara is leaving her final class of the day when she notices that her backpack feels oddly light. Frowning, She stops by her locker to check her belongings, only to find that her history textbook, a heavy, well-worn volume she's had all semester, is missing. Confused, she retraces her steps, searching through her locker, her classroom, even the library, but there's no sign of it. A sense of dread begins to creep over her, and she wonders if Rollins is somehow involved. It seems absurd, even paranoid, but she can't shake the feeling that this is no coincidence. Sure enough, as she's heading towards the school office to report the missing book, she sees Rollins standing by the entrance, a triumphant smile on his face. He holds up her history textbook, waving it slightly, as if to taunt her. "Lose something, Miss Thompson," he calls out, his voice dripping with false innocence. Amara's heart sinks. She approaches him slowly, her face carefully composed. "That's my book," she says, her voice even. He shrugs, looking down at the book as if inspecting it. "Is it?" "Funny, I found it in the boys' locker room, tucked away in a corner. I wonder what it was doing there." She stares at him, her mind racing. She knows he must have planted it there, but proving it would be nearly impossible, and she can see from the look in his eyes that he's fully aware of this. "Maybe you can explain to Principal Harrison why your belongings were found in an unauthorized area," he continues, his tone smug. "I'm sure he'd be very interested to hear your side of the story." Amara feels a surge of frustration, but she takes a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. "I have no idea how it got there," she says, keeping her voice steady, "but I'll be happy to discuss it with Principal Harrison." Rollins's smile falters slightly, as if he hadn't expected her to respond so calmly. He was hoping for a reaction, some sign of fear or frustration that he could use against her, but Amara refuses to give him that satisfaction. "Very well," he mutters, his tone darkening. "But remember this, Miss Thompson, you're not as untouchable as you think." With that, he turns and walks away, leaving her standing in the hallway, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She knows that this isn't the end, that Rollins will continue to find ways to undermine her, to paint her as a troublemaker. But she also knows that she has the strength to endure, to rise above his pettiness and cruelty. After the encounter, Amara goes to Principal Harrison's office, explaining the situation with as much honesty and composure as she can manage. Principal Harrison listens carefully, his expression thoughtful as he takes in her words. "Amara," he says finally, his voice gentle, "I believe you. I know you're not the type to cause trouble, and I trust your word. But Officer Rollins, he's a complicated man. He has his own way of doing things, and sometimes it can come across as overbearing." Amara nods, grateful for his understanding but feeling the frustration of knowing that Rollins is likely to continue his campaign against her. She can see from Principal Harrison's face that he's sympathetic, but she also knows that he has his hands tied, limited in his ability to intervene. "Just stay strong," Principal Harrison advises, offering her a reassuring smile. "You're a bright, capable student, and I know you can handle this. If anything else happens, let me know. I'm here to support you." Amara leaves his office feeling a mixture of relief and lingering apprehension. She appreciates Principal Harrison's support, but she knows that Rollins isn't going to stop. He's determined to find something, anything, that he can use against her, and she'll need to be on her guard. As she walks home that day, Amara thinks about her father, about the strength and resilience he's instilled in her. She knows that she's facing a difficult battle, but she also knows that she has the courage to stand her ground, no matter how many obstacles Rollins throws in her path. In the days that follow, Amara remains vigilant, her senses sharpened, her mind focused. She's prepared for whatever Rollins has planned next, ready to face him with the quiet determination that has become her armor. But as the weeks pass, she begins to realize that this battle is taking its toll. She's exhausted, both physically and emotionally, and the weight of Rollins's constant scrutiny is beginning to wear her down. She feels like she's fighting a never-ending war, one that she's not sure she can win. Yet deep down she knows that she can't give up. She can't let him break her spirit, can't let him define her. And as she stands in the hallway, watching Rollins disappear around the corner, she feels a surge of resolve, a fierce determination to hold her head high and keep moving forward. Because no matter what he throws at her, no matter how many times he tries to tear her down, Amara Thompson will not be defeated. The tension between Amara and Officer Rollins has been simmering for weeks, and it finally reaches a boiling point on an otherwise ordinary Friday afternoon. Amara is leaving her last class of the day, her mind heavy with thoughts of homework, upcoming exams, and the unrelenting scrutiny she faces each day. She's exhausted, yet determined to make it through. But as she heads toward the school's main exit, she notices a familiar figure standing by the doors. Rollins is waiting for her, his posture tense, his face twisted into a look of smug satisfaction. There's something different in his eyes today, a predatory glint that sets off alarm bells in Amara's mind. She steels herself, bracing for yet another confrontation, but something about his demeanor tells her that this time he's going to push harder than ever before. As she approaches the door, Rollins steps directly into her path, blocking her way. "Miss Thompson," he says, his tone sharp and condescending, "I think it's time we had a more serious conversation." Amara holds his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "I don't see what there is to discuss, officer. I'm just trying to go home." Rollins's eyes narrow, his expression hardening. "That's exactly the problem," he sneers. "You think you can just walk around this school, acting like you own the place, disrespecting authority, ignoring the rules." Amara's patience snaps. She's had enough of his baseless accusations, his thinly veiled threats, and his constant attempts to break her spirit. "With all due respect, Officer Rollins," she says, her voice cold but controlled, "I haven't broken any rules. The only one creating problems here is you." For a moment, Rollins is visibly taken aback, his face flushing with anger at her defiance. But instead of backing down, he takes a step closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You think you're untouchable, don't you? Just because your daddy is the chief of police, you think you're above everyone else?" The mention of her father cuts deep, but Amara refuses to let him see how much it affects her. She squares her shoulders, meeting his gaze with unwavering resolve. "I don't think I'm above anyone," she replies, her tone firm. "I just want to be treated with the same respect as everyone else." Rollins laughs, a harsh, mocking sound that echoes through the nearly empty hallway. "Respect. You have to earn that, Miss Thompson. And from where I'm standing, all I see is a spoiled little girl who thinks the rules don't apply to her." Amara's hands clench into fists, her frustration and anger bubbling to the surface. She's kept her composure for so long, held her tongue, endured his harassment day after day. But now, with his face inches from hers, his words dripping with venom, she feels her resolve beginning to crack. "I don't know what you're trying to prove, officer," she says, her voice shaking with barely restrained anger. "But I'm not going to let you intimidate me." Rollins's eyes gleam with satisfaction, as if he's been waiting for her to lose her composure. "Is that so?" he sneers. "Well, let's see how brave you are when you're facing suspension for disruptive behavior." He pulls out a small notebook, flipping it open as he begins to write, his expression one of smug triumph. "I've been documenting every single incident, every time you've challenged me," he says with relish. "The principal will be very interested to see this report." Amara feels a surge of panic, but she quickly quashes it, focusing on keeping her expression neutral. She knows she's done nothing wrong, that Rollins's so-called documentation is nothing more than a twisted narrative he's constructed to justify his vendetta against her. But she also knows that with his position of authority, he could easily make her life even more difficult. Just then, a voice echoes down the hallway, calm yet commanding. What's going on here? Both Amara and Rollins turn to see her father, Chief Marcus Thompson, standing at the end of the hallway, his expression unreadable. He strides toward them with a quiet confidence, his gaze fixed on Rollins, who suddenly looks far less sure of himself. Dad, Amara breathes, relief washing over her. She hadn't expected him to be here, but now that he is, she feels a renewed sense of strength. Marcus's gaze shifts to Amara, his eyes softening momentarily before he turns his attention back to Rollins. Officer Rollins, he says, his voice calm but laced with authority. Would you care to explain why you're confronting my daughter in an empty hallway? Rollins visibly stiffens, but he quickly tries to regain his composure, forcing a tight smile. Chief Thompson, I was just ensuring school policies were being followed. Your daughter has been less than respectful toward authority. Marcus's expression remains impassive as he considers Rollins's words. From what I've been told, he says slowly, Amara has been nothing but respectful. So I'd appreciate it if you'd stop trying to twist the situation to suit your agenda. Rollins's face flushes, a mixture of anger and embarrassment flashing across his features. He opens his mouth to argue, but Marcus raises a hand, cutting him off. I think we both know what's really going on here, Officer Marcus says, his tone steely. I've heard enough from Amara, her teachers, and even the principal to understand the nature of your behavior. Rollins's expression shifts from anger to defensiveness, his eyes darting around as he realizes he's losing control of the situation. Chief, I was just. I don't want to hear it, Marcus interrupts, his voice firm. It's my job to ensure the safety and fair treatment of every citizen in this city, including my daughter. And I will not tolerate anyone abusing their authority, especially when it comes to targeting students. The weight of Marcus's words hangs heavy in the air, and Amara feels a surge of pride as she watches her father stand up for her with quiet but undeniable strength. Rollins's face twists with frustration, but he knows he's been cornered. He shifts uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the floor. This is your last warning, Officer Marcus continues, his voice unwavering. If I hear about any further harassment toward Amara or any other student, I will personally ensure that disciplinary action is taken. Rollins's face is a mixture of anger and humiliation. He nods stiffly, his voice tight as he mutters, Understood, Chief. With that, Marcus turns to Amara, offering her a reassuring smile. Come on, Amara. Let's get you home. Amara nods, casting one last glance at Rollins before following her father out of the school. As they walk down the hallway, she feels a weight lift from her shoulders, a sense of relief washing over her. For the first time in weeks, she feels safe, knowing that her father has her back. Outside, they pause near her father's car, and Marcus turns to her, placing a hand on her shoulder. I'm proud of you, Amara, he says softly. You handled yourself well. She smiles, feeling a mixture of pride and gratitude. Thanks, Dad. I couldn't have done it without everything you taught me. He nods, his expression warm. Remember, Amara, you're strong, and you don't need to put up with anyone's disrespect. You have every right to stand up for yourself. As they drive home, Amara feels a newfound sense of confidence, knowing that she has the support of her family and the strength within herself to face any challenge. The weekend brings a much-needed sense of peace for Amara. The confrontation with Rollins has left her feeling both exhausted and relieved. She's grateful her father stepped in when he did, but the toll of weeks under Rollins's watchful eye has left her drained. By Sunday evening, she's mentally preparing to return to school, wondering if Rollins will finally leave her alone after her father's warning. Part of her is skeptical, but a larger part feels hopeful she's no longer facing this fight alone. When she arrives at school on Monday, she can sense a difference immediately. Students in the hallways glance at her with newfound respect, some even offering small nods or smiles. Word has spread quickly about her stand against Officer Rollins, and she realizes she's not alone in feeling relieved by his absence. Her friend Maya approaches her at her locker, a wide grin on her face. "Girl, you should have seen his face when he left on Friday. It was like he'd been chewed up and spit out. I don't think he'll be bothering anyone anytime soon." Amara smiles, feeling a rush of gratitude for Maya's unwavering support. "Let's hope so," she says, closing her locker. "I just want things to go back to normal." But as she heads to her first class, she can't help but glance down the hallway where Rollins used to stand, his predatory gaze watching her every move. There's an undeniable sense of relief in the empty space he's left behind. Her steps feel lighter, her shoulders less burdened, as if a weight has finally been lifted. During lunch, Principal Harrison stops by her table, his expression warm and reassuring. "Miss Thompson," he says, his voice gentle, "I just wanted to commend you for the way you handled yourself. I know the last few weeks haven't been easy, but you've shown remarkable strength and grace." "Thank you," Principal Harrison, Amara replies, touched by his kindness. "I appreciate all the support you've given me." Harrison nods. "It was the least I could do. And for the record, Officer Rollins has been reassigned. He won't be returning to this school." He pauses, giving her a meaningful look. "The school should be a safe place for every student, and I'm sorry that wasn't the case for you. But I want you to know that you've set an example here, a reminder that we should all stand up for what's right." As he walks away, Amara feels a wave of pride. She hadn't set out to make an example of herself, but knowing her resilience has impacted others gives her a profound sense of purpose. She thinks of her father's words, his insistence on respect and strength in the face of adversity, and realizes that his wisdom has carried her through. After school, Amara heads to her father's office at the police station, a visit she's made countless times, but which feels more significant today. Marcus greets her with a warm smile, standing up from behind his desk to give her a hug. "There's my brave girl," he says, pride evident in his voice. "How was your day?" "Better," she says, smiling. "Principal Harrison told me Rollins has been reassigned." Marcus nods, his expression softening. "He's not just reassigned, Amara. There's a full review of his conduct underway. What he did to you and likely to others won't go unpunished." Amara feels a sense of justice settling within her, a closure she didn't expect but deeply appreciates. "Thank you, Dad," she says quietly. "I couldn't have faced him without everything you've taught me." Marcus squeezes her shoulder gently. "You faced him with your own strength, Amara. All I did was remind you of what's already inside you." He pauses, his voice thick with emotion. "You stood your ground, and that's something not everyone can do. I'm so proud of you." They sit together, talking about her plans for the future, about school, friends, and the importance of resilience. It's a moment of peace, a shared understanding between father and daughter, built on a foundation of mutual respect and unwavering support. As Amara heads home that evening, she feels a renewed sense of purpose. She's learned that standing up for herself doesn't make her difficult or defiant, it makes her strong. And in that strength, she's found the courage to face any challenge life may throw her way.